Well, David Steinberg, your new show on Showtime is just a whole lot of fun. You're Inside Comedy. You're talking to either one or two or three comedians every week about their careers and what it is to be a comedian. Tell us about how that got started and the show itself.
Well, it's rare that, I know it sounds arrogant. I don't mean it that way, but I actually love this show because it's just, it's a way in which to present comedians, not just comedians, but everyone in comedy in what I think is a sort of unique way. And Steve Carell is the executive producer along with me and Vance DeGeneres and Charlie Hartsock. And we started this as a movie. And the concept was to get everybody and frame them in this moment of time as to how they started, who their influences were, just get a different view. Given that I'm a comedian myself, we thought the dialogue between two comedians in the right atmosphere might just work. The surprise to us was everybody said yes. We didn't. The only time we got to know if someone was unavailable. We shot it for about a year, and we felt it was great. I interviewed everyone for 40 minutes, and I went wherever they were. So if we would go to a studio in Los Angeles if they could be there the same day as somebody else. If they were at home in their yard, we would interview them. So we didn't production design it at all. It was just literally about capturing everyone. And then we finished it, we're looking at it, and I was just sitting down to edit it. Well, Carell and everyone was saying, if we do this as a movie, Larry David will have 2 minutes and Mel Brooks will have 3 because we've got so many people. And we just decided, well, maybe there should be a documentary series. And I sat down for a year and just carved out ways in which to couple people together. Some were too, as you say, like you wouldn't put Rickles and Seinfeld necessarily together. But when you hear that they're talking about each other 4 months apart, that was sort of inspirational to me to say, okay, this is going to work. And sometimes they're totally disparate. Sometimes it's like, Stephen Wright and Kathy Griffin were, Kathy Griffin's the highest energy and Stephen Wright's the lowest energy. And just putting it together was a puzzle that was pleasurable, but just took a long time. And then when we took it around, Showtime was interested in it immediately and put us on the air. And it's just been just a great pleasure for all of us, actually.
Well, I was going to ask you how you paired them up, because sometimes you've got a couple of veterans that make total sense, like Carl Reiner and Mel Brooks on the same show, and then sometimes the connection may not be so obvious when you see it on the TV guide listing when you see the two names together.
Yeah, well, some sort of appeared obvious, like the Brad Garrett, Marty Short, Billy Crystal. Each one of those guys deserves a half hour. They all deserve a half hour by themselves. But what happened was, in the Billy Crystal interview, he talked about the Oscars, he talked about a lot of things, but he talked about opening for Sammy Davis Jr. And in the Brad Garrett interview done months before, Brad Garrett talked about going on the Tonight Show with Bill Cosby and his family, but he talked about opening for Sinatra. So we had two opening for big stars. Opening for Sammy Davis Jr. from Billy, opening for Sinatra from Brad, and then Marty Short, who can just talk about the weather, and it's unbelievably funny. But he talked about Jerry Lewis. So we had these three sort of iconic stars of the past being dealt with, but these current stars, and their relationship to these three big, gigantic people, I thought, well, this could be the way in which the show goes. And that was the first show that I put together of the 10. And after a while, I just thought, okay, this is absolutely working. Brad Garrett Sinatra story, The way comedians talk about people they worship is not the way another person. They satirize them in some way. And then of course Marty Short doing the young Jerry Lewis and the older Jerry Lewis. I just knew that this is the way it was to go. But I never did any threesome at all for the rest of the show. The rest of the show were almost all two people. And again, the two people are never together. It goes between one and the other. So the cutting, the music, all of it took on a life of its own, and it seems to be something unique somehow, even though it's just me talking to another person.
Well, that you brought up a person's name I was going to bring up today, Martin Short. That's my only disappointment about the whole season. I don't know if you just cut it out or if he didn't do it, but his impersonation of you is just hilarious. I hope you like it as much as we do.
Well, you know what, Chris? Oh, of course. It is the most remarkable impersonation that anyone has ever done of me, of anyone. You know what? I had it on the credits of the show with Martin. But somehow when I made it about myself, it felt a little too egotistical, even if it was. If you saw that, it was me, the younger version of myself. And Martin had my hair, and he had my timbre and the voice down. And what I had there was, it was SCTV, and John, they were doing a production of Peter Pan. And John Candy was Peter Pan, and David Steinberg, played by Martin Short, was Captain Hook. So I actually ran that through the credits, and he has me as Captain Hook, talking about the same Doc as I talked about. He caught my Canadian accent. Of course, he would get it better than anybody else. But it was amazingly accurate. But I did have it in, and we did talk about it and all of that. But when I put everything together, I sort of eliminated it, and it might have been a mistake to not even include it in the credit. But yeah, it's an amazing impression, Chris. And I'll tell you another piece about the impression. Marty auditioned for a show I did in Canada called the David Steinberg Show. Never be one who's creative about title. And in that show, I put John Candy in that show, and it was like the Larry Sanders Show of 1976. It was I played what some would say a redundancy. I played an egotistical version of myself in a variety show, and Marty was my embarrassing cousin, who I didn't want anyone to know that he was cousin. We called him Johnny Del Bravo. He wore a wig and all of that. So when I had already hired John Candy, and John Candy and Dave Thomas and Catherine O'Hara had been hired. And Marty, they said, "You've got to see Marty Short." And he came in, and I had never seen him before, but our connection was Second City. I was in Second City, sort of ahead of these guys. And then Marty came in, and he was immediately funny, and then he started doing this thing, and everyone was in hysterics. And I said, I'm going to make this easy for you. I'm hiring you. You're so funny. What is that creepy thing you're doing? And he was embarrassed to say I was doing an impression of you, which he was doing. So no one had ever done an impression of me. I had no idea it was me. And then when you see it, it's exactly like me. Anyway, long story version. It was there, and it is remarkable. To this day, it's the perfect version of me.
See, I think you're being genius here because you purposely excluded it so you could put it on the DVD extras and sell it.
Yes, my business sense was really dominating me. I'd be so much wealthier than I am today. But no, it felt a little much, but it will be available.
Is there any kind of you said everybody that you asked appeared that could. Is there any kind of a dream guest that you didn't even approach or wished you had asked to do something like this?
Yeah, the dream guest is Woody Allen. And Woody Allen had done the documentary with Bob Whitey, and we contacted him, and he said, yeah, if you're doing another season, approach me, and like that. So Woody Allen is, he's sort of the dream guest because he's so inaccessible. And but he's not accessible. He is someone I've known over the years, and we've run into each other a lot. And as he's inaccessible for award shows, he's very accessible when you're talking to him and in real life. So he would be ideal. Although I know he would restrict me from, he somehow doesn't want to talk about stand-up comedy, and he was a brilliant stand-up comedian. I think my dog is in the background here. He would be good. I would love to get Cosby, who was also interested. There are so many more people to get. We also do have in the can Ben Stiller, and there's some people that just it was about matching them is who got into the first 10 shows. But yeah, it'd be great to do another 10 shows and match others, and get a few of the younger guys. But I like the combination of old and young, and that connection just has some. It resonated in a way that I never expected it to, and I'm very pleased with that.
I love that documentary, by the way. People that haven't seen it, it's amazing that he was willing to let that documentary crew come into his life like that.
The Bob Whitey documentary.
Yeah, the one that aired recently.
Yeah. He was, Bob Whitey is a great documentary guy, and I did documentaries. He did documentaries on the Marx Brothers that I was in when I was just sort of in my comedian stage, and he knows how to do that stuff. And he was just a friend of Woody's, and yeah, Woody was totally accessible, and it was at that time the only condition was the documentary had to air before we aired him in our show, and I said that's fine.
If the show is nominated for Variety Series this summer at the Emmys, you'll have to pick one of these episodes to submit to the judging panel. Do you know which one that would be?
Yeah, it was very hard to. Oh God, my dog's nose is in your picture.
That's okay.
He's my writer, actually. So
the uncredited writer.
Yeah, you know what, Chris? It was hard to figure out which show exemplifies a series, especially when each show it's eclectic in the series. No interviews are like any other interview, but there was something about the Seinfeld-Rickles interview that I found would make a good presentation, and that was just little coincidences. The fact that when I asked Seinfeld about the Tonight Show, I asked him about his early Tonight Show. And this is, a lot of these subjects he and I have talked about before. But talking on camera, it's sort of like jazz. When I started out, I was sort of a soft-spoken stand-up comedian. So most of the bookers didn't know what to do with me. So I opened for jazz musicians all over the country. And, the Modern Jazz Quartet and Bill Evans, and it was an amazing group. And they were a listening audience, so I was compatible with them. But the jazz musicians would come and support each other and be around each other. And I sat and listened to them talk, and not knowing the music like they did, they talked with such respect for each other at the same time that they were teasing and, oh, you could never hit that chord, and it never left my brain, and that's what I wanted out of this show. And the way these jazz musicians talk now Seinfeld is talking to me by himself, and Rickles is talking to me by himself, and they both talk to me in different ways. Rickles immediately attacks me and is hilarious, and yet after a while just settles into giving information. And the other thing that's interesting about the show to me is that because of the way in which it was structured and set up, the comedians are not as switched on as they would be if they were in front of an audience. Yet they're funny because they're with another guy who they know can cut out the bad parts, keep in the good parts, and whatever. So Seinfeld, I asked him about the Tonight Show, and I know I said to you, Jerry, that was a very big show for you. And he said, well, yeah, that was. We've talked about that. I said, no, but I did something else that was as close as I can remember to being as important and as nerve-wracking and as big for me as The Tonight Show was. And that was recently performing at the White House in a tribute to Paul McCartney in front of Barack Obama. So months before, I had interviewed Don Rickles. And I remembered about Don because I talked about this before. I remembered that he had done a performance at the White House for Ronald Reagan. And when he did that performance, it sort of announced him as no more just a lounge comedian, but a comedian that could get a mass audience. It was really important to him. And he talked about that. So when Jerry said that to me, that at the White House, that was really important. In my mind, I had already heard the Reagan White House being important to Don Rickles. And then another element came together, and he said, and he didn't know that I didn't mention Don Rickles to him. I didn't put them together in the talking to him. And then he said to me, Chris Rock and I saw Don Rickles just the other night, and he talked about if there's any white light of comedy, it's Don Rickles. So those connections mattered to me, and that's why I put them together. And I think what you get Jerry being very funny as he always is, but insightful about his own work and another comedian's work. And then I was able to acquire the actual White House that he took, performance that he talked about with Paul McCartney and Rickles with Reagan. So that's why I made it the sort of Emmy consideration, But there were, I could think of 7 more that could have done just as well.
One of the things I loved about the show and the decisions that you had to make, you mentioned before that you could have put the comedians in front of a big audience, and that would have played a certain way. And you could have also had your crew be totally silent, and that would have played a certain way. But we never see the crew, but it sounds like there's maybe, 12 or 15 or 20 of them in the room, and you allow them to laugh. And it really makes, I think, the interviews fun because the comedians start playing, most of them do, to that small group.
Yeah, and you're right about it. It was a difficult decision for me to let them do that because mostly you ask everyone to be quiet, and then it's sort of this antiseptic conversation and all of that. And I thought I had made 2 decisions from the beginning that made a difference. One is eclectic in the way in which it looked, and let the crew laugh. Let them laugh. Don't force it, but let them laugh wherever they could. And I will tell you that I was only manipulative with Mel Brooks because Mel Brooks said I don't have much time and all of that. So for Mel Brooks, not only did I have the crew there, but I allowed the crew to bring wives, cousins, whoever they wanted to bring. So Mel walked in and said, I've got 5 minutes, and 45 minutes later when he heard all these laughs, he was still there and cooking. But I'm interested that you noticed that because yes, those are the decisions that make such a difference in this show. Just that alone, it has an intimacy, but yet you're hearing genuine laughter. There is no canned laugh at all anywhere there.
Well, I love that part of the show, and it's funny for me to watch them, whoever you're interviewing. They kind of cut their eyes a little bit sometimes, just once they realize, okay, the crew's going to laugh. Any audience is an audience they want to play to.
Yeah, absolutely. You play differently. That's what I mean about you could be casual in conversation and you hear a laugh, and then you could just open up and improvise a little bit more than you might, and absolutely.
Well, another project that you're going to be on the Emmy ballot this year is the divorce episode of Curb Your Enthusiasm. You had a Directors Guild nomination just a few weeks ago for that, and you've been up before at the Emmys for Curb for directing. What's it like working on that show and that whole atmosphere?
Well, for one thing, I had 4 Directors Guild nominations, so basically it's great to be told that you're being nominated, but to be losing every time you go to have that dinner, I'm a little reluctant to eat whatever they give me at this point because I have never won, but it's still incredible to get your directors vote nominating you and the Emmys. Well, that show is the most fun show any director could work on. It is, Larry David is not that character. He is a writer, probably the most incredible comedy writer we've ever had, especially for television and just in general, just a brilliant comedy writer. So in the first year, we were sort of stumbling around trying to figure out what to do, and he wanted to improvise. Larry wanted to improvise not because he was connected to the Second City purity of improvisation, because he said, I can't act, and I won't be able to repeat a line. So the first time they started to do it was all over the place, and then I came in, and they wanted me in early because of my Second City background, and I showed them, you do a little bit of, you got to tell the other person what the scene's about at least, and then we sort of found our way, and people say, oh, well, the show is improvised. Well, in truth, that show takes at least a year to write 10 shows, because the structure is as complicated as Seinfeld or any show. And once you know what that structure is, the dialogue is not, it's not that important. It is, all you got to do is play the character within the story. And since we're not jokey in that show, we're outrageous, but not jokey, all you got to do is just play what it is that's happening at that moment in the scene. So it's the most involved as a director that you get. You're involved in the writing process because you're in that dialogue writing. You're preparing the actors. The actors haven't seen what's come before it. You're out of sequence and all of that. So as a director, it's hands-on directing. I mean, it is. That's what makes it just great fun and exciting. And you're writing, you're directing. It's just unique, and the atmosphere is never tense. I can't remember a moment of tension in the 9 and some odd years that we've been doing the show.
Is it a difficult show because of the way it's structured as you're shooting it to edit it later and figure out what not to leave in?
Yeah, it's editing is another way of writing in comedy, in almost anything. So, yeah, we will see, the advantage you have is we allow ourselves to be bad. The interesting thing about the improvisation in the show is not to catch a spontaneous moment. Usually when you're improvising, when people are improvising on stage, they get to see the moment as it happens. On film, especially in Curve, we're using the improvisation as another technique of writing. So we do the scene over and over and over again. So you use your improvisation, you say it again, and you say it again, and you say it again. You can add a line, subtract a line, and all of that. But it becomes a really important tool for writing and rewriting. So when you're going to edit, you've got a big bundle of stuff that you have to choose from. But sometimes the scene, the moment that you thought was insignificant becomes the line that you use. And it's always very surprising. But editing is another writing stage.
Out there. I want to talk a little bit about your career. As you see behind me, one of my favorite shows of all time is The Odd Couple. You were on one of their top, I would say, 2 or 3 episodes they ever did, called The Odd Couple Meet Their Host, where you play yourself and you're a talk show host. Tell us about working on that episode, and is it something, as you're out and you're in the public, is that something that gets brought up a lot?
Well, it is brought up a lot, surprisingly, for something that was done in the 70s, I guess, whatever it was. It was Tony Randall's, one of his favorite shows. Basically, the premise is he goes on The Tonight Show, Oscar goes on The Tonight Show and talks about Tony, and then Tony's very offended that Oscar got laughs. So he's going to go and talk about Oscar. And he hires a writer from The Tonight Show. And, of course, Johnny's not there that day. I'm the host, the guest host, which I did a lot in those days. And the premise was just hilarious. And, of course, Tony Randall takes a writer's and says, "Oh, look, here's his dirty socks. We can have a lot of fun with the dirty." So he's trying to find material about Jack Klugman, and he's going to go and kill. And of course, when he gets on the air, he freezes and he can't open his mouth. And at one point, he tries to get relaxed, and the aficionados of the show always remember this. And he leans back. And his chair goes, and I just luckily caught him by the toe. He was going to fall. And I caught him by the toe and brought him up, and we continued that to the last time that I saw him, which was, we saw each other over the years for 30 years or 25 years after that. He would always say, I'm so glad that you went on and didn't break the scene. So the audience actually believed that was supposed to happen. So it was incredible. And Tony was a little bit like that character, very specific and detailed, and a comedy genius in a way, an expert, a genius. And Jack Klugman was the opposite. He liked to go to the racetrack and all that, but of course, like Emmy Award-winning actor who could do serious stuff in comedy, and it was Gary Marshall, Jerry Belson, a great group of writers, the best writers. I was honored to be on that show. At the time, I just did it because it was a new show that was starting. I never knew it was going to become iconic in some way.
Those two men, there haven't been many people in the history of TV with better comedy timing than those two guys. I'm really, as good as it gets. You can watch the shows now, and they hold up in every way because of the timing, the writing, genuinely, laugh out loud, humorous situations between the two. Well, you mentioned The Tonight Show, and that's going to be my final area of questioning here. I hope it hasn't felt like an interrogation or a trip through your whole career. But tell me about the very first time you appear on The Tonight Show. What's that like, just being told that you're going to do it, and then what's that like actually being on that stage?
So I was bumped for about 3 or 4 times before I really got on. I was in my 20s when I did The Tonight Show. Carson and I immediately connected. The first show, I did a piece I had done at Second City, and it was a how-to record, how to win a friend. The odd part of that, not odd part, the interesting part is that the person who was the voice on that record was actually Carly Simon, who you never saw. She was just off stage being the voice of this album. We were good friends at the time. And so she just said, I'll do the voice for you, and she did. But the second appearance, after the second appearance, Johnny committed to me in a very open way, and new comedian and all of that. And then we took a break at the commercial, and he said, David, these shows are very hard for me to do. I'm going to start taking a break on Monday, like in 2 weeks. Do you want to host a show? And I was so stupid. I said, yeah, sure. Like at 26. I'll host the Tonight Show. Unfortunately, I was just too dumb to think of how huge this was. And I started hosting, I started guesting with him, and I never liked standing up on the Tonight Show to do stand-up comedy. I did it quite a few times. But my feeling about stand-up on television is that you lose something by standing up because you're saying, here's where the jokes are going to be. And you don't get the benefit of the space that you have when you're doing stand-up live, which is exciting and dynamic. And so it took me a year or two to just talk Johnny into letting me come in. I'll give you 3 subjects. I will have a way in which to go on all of them. You can interrupt wherever you want, come in wherever you want. He resisted it for so long. And then I remember the first time that we did that, I said, I forget the subject, talk about the Knicks, dating, whatever. And every subject that I talked about, he was amazing. I would start it, and he was so loose because when you host the show, as I learned from hosting it, you have to ask questions and you have to know where the out is on the story. But he didn't have to do that at all, so he could actually just be himself and be funny with me. He talked in all 3 segments, got almost all the laughs, and afterwards, as we were walking off, he said to me, he said, "You were brilliant tonight." And I hardly opened my mouth. It was all Johnny. But I had arrived at a way in which to work with him, and that went on, as you know, to the last week of him doing the show. I've gone almost every 6 or 7 weeks.
If you had this show Inside Comedy, say 25, 30 years ago, do you think he would have joined you, and do you think he would have been a good guest? Would he have opened up?
Yes. He would have done it. We were good friends. You know, he did those kinds of things for me. I mean, I opened in the 90s. The writers from Mad About You and Seinfeld were friends of mine. They wanted me to do stand-up again. And I went to this little club in the village, not in the village, but in California, in the Valley. And he showed up for that. So I was able to talk about him, and he played with the audience there. Not a lot of people, but a couple hundred people. He was a great interview. He was very funny. When there were events like an event called the Share Show, which was a charity show, and Sammy Davis Jr. and Sinatra would do it. All the wives were involved in that show. And Johnny would open that show. He would do 6 minutes, 10 minutes. Whoever the comedian was, no one could follow him. He was, you just couldn't follow him. He did his work. He loved to do it. He wasn't a stand-up comedian from the start, but he had all the chops. He would have been great on Inside Comedy. It would have been my deep, deep pleasure to interview him. It would have been great fun for both of us.
Well, we sure wish you luck this summer on getting some Emmy nominations for both Inside Comedy and for Curb, and just really appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Chris. I enjoyed talking to you.